built up over hundreds of years. Everybody gets a little bit off of that. If you pull that all away and you just block grant it down, the key, you can't do this halfway. You have to do it completely. You have to give, and that's where I said king for a day. You've got to provide all of this freedom at the same time. And what will end up happening? What will our school system look like? Well, let's go back to the analogy of other types of industry. In the school systems right now, and this is where my conservative legislators actually lose sight of the way economies of scale work. In the education world, in the government spending world, you would never build two buildings right next to each other. You wouldn't, like we do gas. I mean, you go to a corner, you've got 3 gas stations. They're all exactly the same. They're selling the exact same thing. That's 3 times the capital cost, putting it all on that street corner. But how is it that it's cheaper to do that? Why do they do this? Because the capital is a small expenditure. It's the competition that keeps the prices down and actually makes those that triple the capital cost actually pay off. And so rather than equally spacing the schools out and making it so you've got a monopoly over this one area and you have very little choice in moving, well, what ended up happening is you would end up seeing, like the shopping malls would be the way the education facilities would end up being. You would have like a mall where you've got Sears and Dillard's or your anchor tenants. Those would be your district schools. And then you would have these little bitty schools that would prop up that are like the little bitty stores that kind of come and go in the mall that serve a niche need. Maybe somebody comes up with a really good, program for, programming software. And so you get people to do that, or performing arts, or other types of things. And so what you happen is you have one location for all your costs for bringing everybody in and out, but you have the kids can come and go. You can go now, you can move with your feet. If you've got a school that has a really good math program, they can have them go to those classes in the morning, and a really good science program over here in the afternoon. And then the school districts start developing into niches, into what they become good at, because that's where they attract the students. And parents don't have to worry about where I live. The good school will be there because they'll be free to come to me, as opposed to the other way around. So that's how that system will work. And we're talking a 50-year plan to try to pull something off like that. I don't even know if it's politically possible, but you could do parts of this. You could break that M&O, the capital M&O thing, pretty simply. We could do that in 1 year with one legislation. You'd need a governor and a legislature to push really hard, and you could break that rule down. Yes. I don't think it's going to pass, and actually, I don't think it's a good time for a tax. I mean, there's never really a good time for a tax increase, but this is actually the worst time, in my opinion. Again, let's go back to what's causing our revenues to drop. We've seen the sales and income numbers dropping because people are losing their jobs and people are pulling back on the big ticket items. That's where the volatility occurs. Well, you raise a 1 cent tax, that's a 1% price increase on car sales. That's a 1% price increase on new home construction through the construction sales tax. So you're basically raising those big ticket items that we need to get going again. And so I think it's actually counterproductive in that area. And I actually don't think it would pass. I think if you put it on the ballot, people voted for tax increases when we had surpluses, when we had resources. I think right now, I think it would fail if it was put on the ballot. I think, and I give an example of Washington State. During the dot-com bubble, they got hit really hard. And so they put all the best programs that everybody loved the most. It was education and police and fire and safety. That they put those programs out there, and they said, we're going to have to do massive cuts if you don't do a tax increase. And Washington State voted it down. Not exactly a bastion of right-wing, fiscal conservatism. And so if they're going to not pass it, I can only imagine what would happen here. Now, from a political perspective for the legislature, I actually don't think the votes are there either. I think what's likely to occur is the basic structure that she outlined is what will happen. $1 billion of spending cuts, $1 billion from the stimulus, But instead of $1 billion tax increase, it'll be $1 billion of borrowing. And they'll just basically borrow $1 billion. That effectively, you win on the overall breakdown of no additional cuts, but the tax increase is not passed in the borrowing. And I actually think from a economic standpoint is probably the better way to go, because if we're raising taxes and California is not, that's going to even hurt our development. I mean, what we really need is for Gray Davis to get reelected governor of California. I mean, that would help us more than anything else economically. Mm-hmm. How do you kind of balance your revenue sources so we don't get in this kind of situation? Good question. This is actually a misnomer that a lot of people make this mistake. They think sales tax is the most volatile revenue stream. It's actually not. The most volatile revenue stream we have is corporate income tax. Positive and negative swings in the 30 to 40% range. The second most volatile revenue stream we have is individual income tax. That's the second most. The second to the most stable is sales tax. The most stable is obviously property tax when you don't have a real estate bubble. Actually, they're about the sales and income are about the same. Where you see a lot of the volatility is in the switch between what type of things you spend your money on, and let's think about this. Let's back up for a second and think about the process. When you go into a recession, when people start to pull back on their spending and people start to lose their jobs, well, first of all, corporations have the most control over what their income is because they can move losses into various quarters. They can shift around things. They've got the most control over what their income is. So that's why you see a bigger volatility. Individuals have less of a control over their income and picking when my income is going to come in and when it's not. But still, you see a greater impact there on less than what the volatility of corporate, but still much more because people lose their job. You have unemployment. They go for patches without money. Sales, even when you don't have a job, you're still putting food on your table. You may be pulling it out of your credit cards or your savings account. People still spend money. And so from the cycle, you may shift what you're spending it on during this time frame, but just through the whole economic cycle, you have more stability in the sales side. You're always going to have volatility in your revenues. Make no mistake, economic cycles have happened before. They're going to happen again. As government, we should not be surprised by a recession. The timing may be surprising. The date that it actually happens may be a surprise. The fact that one happens shouldn't be a shock to anybody. The way you solve this problem isn't by trying to find a tax code that goes opposite to the economy, because if you did that, if there is no perfect tax for this, but if you did, that means if you have one that collects the same amount of money no matter what the economy is doing, it means effectively during the bad times, you're taking a larger percentage of everybody's income, and during the good times, you're taking a smaller percentage. That doesn't make a lot of sense. The best effective tax system that's the best for the economy is one that reacts up and down with the economy. So in other words, when times are good, it collects more money. When times are tough, it gets out of the way and collects less. Now, as a government, your needs are just the opposite. You have less needs in the good time and more needs in the bad time. So how do you fix this? And this is a proposal that I put forward something like this a couple years ago, and I think we're working on it now to put forward, hopefully for the ballot next year. The rainy day fund. That's the tool that really should be used, but I don't think we should have one rainy day fund anymore. That was a mistake because, again, if we were to have 3 to 4 months worth of savings, that would be $3 to $4 billion. A pool of that amount of money, you're never going to get in. Politicians keep their finger off of it. They're going to be pet projects galore going for that. So what I think we ought to do is we ought to hire, there are actuaries out there. These are really smart math people. They do this for all the various risk factors for insurance and other areas. The guys that figure out what the percentage likelihood that a cruise ship is going to sink